Hey guys, welcome back to Tales from the Junkyard. Today, we're at my dad's garage again. And I want to kind of just go over a few things. I know that last time when we did a video about his satellite, we were talking about hot rodding in the modern day, right? So like working out how to fix an issue here and there, the hot air issue he was having, and he made his own intake system, his own cold air intake system, if you will. And sort of continuing that, might be part 3, I'm not sure at this point, but he's got something that he's doing that might actually apply to you guys. So let me just show you real quick. All right, guys. Now, if you'll remember, this is a 5.9 liter V8 or 360 cubic inches, and it had a completely different carburetor when you guys first saw this engine. Now, what we did is pretty extensive, or actually what he did, my dad, to it was pretty extensive, and I'll kind of try to piece it apart so you guys can understand what's going on here. So the issue, what he was trying to figure out, if you guys remember, these tubes right here are for the cold air intake system. Now, he was trying to find a way to get colder air into the system to sort of help the superheating issue he was having with fuel and detonation and things. Now, he got the air pretty cold, but he was still having issues. So he did a little bit of research, and turns out that our fuel nowadays, and you guys already might know this, but there's a lot of ethanol in the fuel now in modern times, right? There's a lot more ethanol than it would have been back then. So these old carburetors, these old engines weren't really meant to function with modern fuels. They just weren't, and especially not the fuel systems. And so the way these systems work, if you don't already know, is there's a fuel pump that sits somewhere down in there, and that mechanically pumps fuel into this carburetor. Now, inside are bowls that hold the fuel, and there's some jets that essentially draw fuel as the engine needs it, right? And that kind of just functions. So the fuel literally sits there as it needs it, and then more fuel goes in as it requires more fuel in the bowls. Pretty simple. That's a straightforward. Any carburetor pretty much works like that. Now, back then, that was fine because you had, fuels were different. They were composed differently. They didn't evaporate the same way. This, because of the modern fuel with the more ethanol, that tends to evaporate a lot faster and a lot lower temperatures than old fuel used to. So that creates an issue, something called vapor lock. And so what would happen is the fuel in here, right, would be pumped in the car. You're running the car, you're driving the car, and you would end up, super heating your carburetor and the fuel in it. Now, while you're driving, that's okay because it's using the fuel. And you might notice, some hesitation and stuff, especially if the day is really hot. But, you're driving. Now, you park the car. You're having lunch. You're having a nice time, whatever it is. And you come back to the car, and now the damn thing won't start. You start pumping and pumping. The thing won't start, and then you accidentally flood the thing now because you've been pumping the whole time. You're having issues. What happened? Well, what more than likely happened at that point is the fuel boiled itself to the point where the air bubbles, the air bubbles caused by the alcohol trying to boil out of the fuel, pushed back into the fuel that was in the line, and there's vapor stuck in there. So now you're basically just stuck it in vapor, and it'll sound like it wants to start, but it won't. Or you'll have a lot of hard starting. And then after you're done, and when you, again, that'll cause also, hesitation when you're driving around and stuff. So that's an issue. Well, how do you fix that problem? Let's get to the point, right? Okay, so you see how this has the original fuel line that would go to this carburetor. You see that there, right? That goes in from the pump. Now, there is out there a Uncle Tony video where he talks about a fuel filter that has kind of a return, and that sort of solves that problem, and I'm sure that works really, really well. But this is a sort of the same solution done differently. I'll explain how. You see this carburetor, or this Edelbrock, sorry? It has the entrance here, and you'll notice it goes through the back here like a fuel line, or a fuel rail, if you will. And then you have this other port. Now, back then, that would have been called a dual feed carburetor. 2 lines would go into this carburetor to feed it more fuel, right? This, by the way, is an 800 CFM carburetor. I'll explain why that happened. But what was in here originally was about a 650 carburetor, a Holly, actually. And that was enough carburetor, but it had that superheating issue, right? It would boil off the fuel, and then it wouldn't start. Well, the only reason we went with this carburetor is because it has the dual ports. Why is that important? Well, we have the inlet, and then that other port is acting as its outlet. So we did a flow-through design on the fuel because we installed a return line. Now, you guys that are familiar with fuel injections, you'll know what a return line is for, right? Fuel comes in at a certain pressure, goes back out to the tank, and it's always running fuel through the system. The added benefit is you're always running fresh fuel that's cooled from the tank into the fueling system, right? And the cooler the fuel maintains itself, the better it is, the more dense it is, the less potential it has for boiling off. So that's what we did with this carburetor. That's what we ran into. And so that's why you see all these other things here. So fuel pressure regulator. The reason that was installed is these carburetors only really require about 5 PSI. And sometimes these fuel pumps can produce far more than that. And if you just, these fuel pump dump somewhere in there. And there it is. There it is, yeah. And so what happens is you're overflow or you're overpressurizing the floats. And so you might actually blow through the float seats in the carburetor. So it's a good idea to put a regulator just to make sure you're getting the pressure you require, not more. So there's that, right? And then you'll see this valve and all that stuff. That's for the return. Now we're regulating how much fuel is coming through the return, because if you just put a straight line to the back of the tank, you're literally just going to blow through the carburetor and then back out the tank again. If you don't have any resistance, the fuel is not going to get to where it needs to go. So you need to put some resistance on the return so that fuel stays where it needs to go, but still is able to flow out. And then this, like I said, is an 800 CFM carburetor. So we had to rejet it and put different needles and such to get it to where it runs this engine and not over fueling it, so to speak. And so it's been tuned. So now the big question, did it fix it? Well, we installed this glass fuel filter you can see right here. And the way this works for us, actually, it's supposed to be so that you can see if there's debris in there. The way we're using it is, it's kind of like a sight glass. So a telltale sign of fuel boiling off from here is that it'll go back through here, right, through the lines, and this will get flushed. There'll be no fuel in there. And so what we did is we drove it around and let it saturate with the heat, and lo and behold, there was still fuel in there. So moral of the story is, if you guys are still running a carburetor in the modern times with your hot rod or whatever, you might want to put a return system on it. It'll benefit from not giving you that vapor lock that you guys might be seeing, and it actually cools down the fuel, so you can run a richer mixture. So that's really, really cool. And I mean, hot rodding, we're hot rodding in the modern era, right? So how are we hot rodding the modern era? The difference between throwing money at this and figuring, because guys out there would be like, well, why don't you just swap out to fuel injection? Screw it. Why are you messing with this? Well, fuel injection's about $3 grand, $2 grand. If you're lucky, it's $1,700, right? Or you're throwing money at it, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But hot rodding started where you had to figure out a problem. So you wanted more power out of the car, right? Old school hot rods. How'd you do that? Nothing was available at the car. The car only came with whatever engine was in it. Well, you swapped engines out, but there were no kits for that. So you had to figure out how to make that work. That's what hot rodding is. Well, this is what we're doing. We're trying to figure out how to make this work nowadays, right? And so that's what that is. And side note on this little experiment here, you'll notice that if you look down the barrels of this carburetor, that is not standard. You see those barrels there? They're kind of like a little plug. Well, that right there, my friends, is restrictors. Now, that's more of an experiment, but I'll go over it briefly. What it is we're trying to see if we can downsize this carburetor a little bit to where it's flowing less than the 800 CFM. But wait, you say, why would you do that? That makes no damn sense. Well, think about it this way. If you put too much of carburetor on an engine, you're going to overflow it. And if there's more air than the car needs, you're going to have to put more fuel into it, meaning it's going to run less efficiently, right? And you're just going to be basically flooding the car the whole time. It's going to run rich. It's going to have a smell to it, so on and so forth. We're trying to make this run as efficiently as possible. I know, fruitless endeavor, but bear with us. That's what we're trying to do, right? And so what he did is, or my dad did, is he created these, I guess he calls them hats, these little like washer bushing things. And so what they do is they sit on top of the barrels like you saw there, and they reduce the amount of air actually going in into an 800 CFM carburetor. So it sort of turns it into like a 750 CFM carburetor, right? It reduces it down. However, the back barrels remain huge. So he sort of created his own, what's called a spread bore design. And what that is smaller bores in the front of the carburetor, bigger bores in the back. That's essentially what a spread bore carburetor is, if you guys were wondering. But anyway, we took this out on a drive, and oh boy howdy, This thing runs wonderful. We heat soaked it, made sure that all the issues with the vapor were done, and yeah, it works fine. So this thing worked out really good. It pays to do your research, right, and experiment out there. I mean, we solved an issue that maybe not a whole lot of people have, but if you're still messing around with an old car or something that has carburetors, this is something that you might want to look into. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out for you guys, and let me give you a sneak peek of what's coming up next. All right, so back here, look at that. What the heck is that? That is my new differential. So that is going into my Barracuda. This is an 8 3/4. Sorry, Mopar guys. Sorry, 8 3/4 differential. And this thing is, they're different casing, castings, and so on. This is not the most desirable one, but it's a lot stronger than what I got going on. And it's gonna fix my wheel bolt pattern issue. It's shorter overall than what I have in my car, and it's just gonna work better. So that'll be going in soon. You'll see a video on that, or several. We'll see what happens. But anyway, so thank you so much for joining me today. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.